The way we all learn has completely fractured, and it's happened right along generational lines. It's kind of wild when you think about it. In just a couple of decades, the whole process has been so radically transformed that it's creating this massive disconnect between parents and their kids, and even their kids' kids. So today, we're going to dig into why that is. I mean, just think about it for a second. If you grew up lugging around heavy textbooks and flipping through encyclopedias, the idea of learning, say, a complex historical event from a 60-second video probably seems, well, a little baffling. But this isn't just about a change in preference. Nope. It's a fundamental shift in how our brains are literally being wired to take in and process information. So let's unpack how we got here.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to lay out a really clear framework for the generations. Then we'll take a trip from the old analog world across the bridge into the era of digital natives. After that, we'll pinpoint the single biggest trend that's driving this whole evolution. And finally, we'll take a peek into the future to see what learning might look like for the next generation on the block, Gen Beta.
To make sense of all these changes, we really need a good map. So, we're going to use the McCrindle framework. It's super helpful because it organizes modern history into these neat 15-year generational cycles. This structure is going to let us see the patterns and, more importantly, the stark contrasts between each group with real clarity.
Okay, so here's our cast of characters. Our story starts with Gen X, pretty much the last of the analog natives. They're followed by Gen Y, or the millennials, who were the true pioneers of the digital world. Then you've got Gen Z, the first true digital natives, and right now Gen Alpha, who are literally growing up with AI assistants as their playmates. And looking just over the horizon, we have the predicted Gen Beta, who will start being born in 2025. This timeline is going to be our guide through this whole thing.
So let's start by looking back at the two generations that really form the bridge between the analog and digital worlds. That's Gen X and Gen Y. What's so unique about them is that they experienced life both before and after the internet came along and changed absolutely everything. You gotta understand, their learning styles were forged in completely different environments. Gen X, often left to figure things out on their own, became absolute masters of independent study. You could just give them a problem, some clear instructions, and they were good to go. But Gen Y, they grew up with the very beginnings of a more connected world. They thrive on collaboration, on group work, and on learning that feels emotionally engaging and, well, meaningful. And you see this perfect contrast in their relationship with technology, too. For Gen X, tech was a tool, something you adopted to be more productive. That's why they're called digital immigrants. But Gen Y, they were the digital pioneers. They didn't just adopt the internet. They grew up right alongside it. They saw Google and social media being born, and they shaped it just as it was shaping them.
And of course, these experiences shaped their core personalities. Gen X are those famously independent and, let's be honest, kind of skeptical, latchkey kids. They really value self-reliance and work-life balance. Gen Y, on the other hand, was shaped by a more optimistic time. They're driven by purpose and famously value experiences, travel, concerts, way more than owning things. Their pioneering work basically built the bridge to the next era.
All right, so now we cross that bridge and step into the modern era. We're about to meet the first generations who were born into a world where the internet wasn't some cool new thing, it was just a utility as common as electricity. Welcome to the digital native revolution. Now, for Generation Alpha, that's anyone born from 2010 onward, a really powerful new name has emerged, the Glass Generation. And let me tell you, it's an incredibly descriptive name for a very good reason. So we call Gen Z digital natives because, they were the first mobile-first generation. But Gen Alpha, they take it to a whole other level. For them, screens, the glass of a phone or a tablet, have been their pacifiers, their playgrounds, and their very first teachers. AI assistants like Siri and Alexa, they aren't magic. They're just normal, just another member of the household. And this completely rewires their expectations for learning. So while Gen Z got used to on-demand micro-learning, think YouTube tutorials, Gen Alpha expects learning to be interactive. They learn by doing, by creating, and they expect every single interface to respond to their touch or their voice. This makes something like passively listening in a traditional classroom a real challenge. Okay, so we've got these really distinct generational snapshots. But what's the big picture here? Well, there's an overarching trend that connects all of them, a really fundamental shift in the very purpose of learning itself. It breaks down like this. For Gen X and Y, learning was all about acquiring knowledge. See, information was relatively scarce, and the main goal was to get it and store it in your head.
For Gen Z and Alpha, who live in an age of total information overload, the key skill became filtering it, finding what's relevant and tossing out all the noise. And now for the next generation, Gen Beta. The core skill is going to be to manipulate knowledge, using AI as a creative partner. The core idea here is really powerful. We are moving from learning to acquire knowledge to learning to filter knowledge, and finally to learning to manipulate knowledge. Now, it's not that one skill just replaces the other. It's more that the emphasis shifts with each big technological leap. We've gone from memorizing facts to being good at finding the right fact, to now knowing what question to ask an AI to generate a completely new one. And that, of course, brings us to the future. So let's look ahead. Let's talk about the generation that's going to be born into a world that is completely saturated with artificial intelligence. Generation Beta. So, if Gen Z were digital natives, Gen Beta will be AI natives. For them, technology won't be something you type on or tap on. It's going to be the seamless extension of their world, controlled by voice, by gestures, and who knows, maybe even by direct thought through neural interfaces. So what on earth does learning look like for them? Well, for one, rote memorization will be almost completely obsolete. I mean, why memorize what an AI can recall instantly, right? The skills that will be at a premium will be the uniquely human ones, knowing how to ask the right questions, or prompts, to an AI, being able to critically think about the answers it spits back, and, of course, navigating complex social situations with emotional intelligence. This constant AI integration is going to shape their entire identity. The line we see between online and offline will probably just cease to exist for them. It'll all be one fluid biodigital reality. And think about this. In a world of constant connection, things we totally take for granted, like true privacy, or just a conversation with no technology in the room, those could become the ultimate luxuries. And all of this leaves us with a pretty profound and kind of heavy question for our future. If a machine can know almost everything, what becomes the point of a human learning anything at all? What skills, what values, what purpose will define us when we are no longer the smartest things on the planet? That's a question for all of us to think about. Thanks for tuning in.